Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to Friday Live at 5 Endeavor BS, where the BS stands for Brewing and Spirits, and that's actually the only possible combination of those particular two letters. I'm Scott, and with us, as always, is Carrie.
Hi.
And today we have a very special guest. It's the one and only Cameron Lloyd, who happens to be our brewmaster. Cameron, how's it going?
Good. You know, the special guest who also works here, like as often as everybody else who sits at this table.
Exactly. I mean, Cameron is our co-founder, co-owner, master brewer. He is our resident beer geek. Sorry about that. Audio kerfuffle. Nerd alert. Yeah, we added that button. We had talked about, Carrie and I, we were joking around last week about nerd alerts and kept saying that. So we did add the special sound effect button specifically for today.
Yeah.
Nerd alert.
Special for you.
Oh, good.
Special for Cameron. So we are all nerds here at Endeavor Brewing and Spirits, but Cameron is kind of the alpha nerd, I think, of all of us. And you'll probably get to know that today as we're listening to Cameron. So Cam, we just had a pretty big day. Why don't you tell them a little bit about what we did today?
Oh, well, it was a canning day, so we canned beer. We canned out our Gall and our Saga. So Saga has been a good one. That's been since we released that's grown hugely in popularity since we first released it, and become a regular thing that we need to do more of. And the Gall is our Imperial IPA. That this is our second batch of it ever, and it gained a cult following coming out of COVID. It went from something that's sort of like, that's there and weird, and then our friend Jamie's golf friends all fell in love with it. None of whom come here. Just their country club always wanted Gall.
Yeah, and we've got a few regulars here, like our friend Ben, who is in every day, and he's all about the Gall. And he's very excited to be able to take it home.
It's nice to be able to answer his question that he's been asking every day.
Since we ran out.
On tap?
Yeah, exactly.
Is Gall back on tap? Yes.
So Cameron and I were here this morning with Sean and with Pat and with our brew team, and canning out both Gall and Saga just this morning. So it's been a long day already.
It has.
And now it's fun to sit down for happy hour. So
it is.
Yeah, why don't you?
So we should probably crack.
Yeah, let's crack open a beer. What do you want to start with?
If we're doing these back to back, I'd say start with the Saga and then go to Gall. I think after we switch to Gall, that's just what we're going to hang out with.
I have a dented up can that I dropped on the floor, so the top dented, but still good, just a little smushed. Do we want to use these glasses?
Yeah. So the Saga, for those of you who have not had Endeavor Brewing Icelandic Saga,
You should.
You should. What's it like? Sorry, I'm
unlike any beer you've ever had before.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm making fun of
in the best possible
these
way.
Are like, I'm not just hanging out with friends. Well, I guess I am just hanging out with friends. I'm not just hanging out with people who know all of my inside jokes. So sorry, this is why I
nerd alert.
I was just saying, I'm here all the time. I'm just usually hiding in the back without people around me. So this was one that Scott challenged me to make. If you want to tell the story of it.
Yeah. So basically, this was a couple years back when my son was just turning 1 year old. My wife and I decided to take a trip, and we did a thing where I planned the trip, and I didn't tell her where we were going. So she got a packing list and dates, and her sister, who knew where we were going, kind of helped her pick out things. But anyway, so we ended up flying to Iceland. She had no idea where we were going till we got to the gate at the airport, and it said Reykjavik. And rented a camper van and drove all the way around Iceland on the ring road and got into lots of adventures, camped out the whole time. And if you didn't know this, Iceland is very cheap to get to, but it's very expensive when you're there. So if you go out to a dinner in Reykjavik, a beer will be like $25. Just exchange rate kind of stuff. So we didn't drink a lot of beer, but we tried a variety of them. came back here and we had an REI travel class that we did right here in our event room here at the Brewstillery. And it was a travel class for Iceland. So I asked Cameron, I said, Cameron, we are doing an REI travel class. Let's do a pilot batch, just a simple keg, simple.
Simple.
And a beer inspired by Iceland. So all of the beers I found in Iceland had a little bit of wheat in them for the most part. And we had been talking for a while about making some unhopped beers that don't have flavor aroma hops. I'll let you get into the details of that.
Yeah.
And playing around with some different flavors. And another thing that's big in Iceland are different herbs, but sage is everywhere, and so is Icelandic star anise. So I was like, let's try to do something with a little bit of wheat and sage and star anise and
about this alcohol
and
content.
gumballs and gumballs.
Yeah.
and that's pretty much all that I gave to him. And then this is what he did.
I mean, and that's basically the story behind it, I guess. Aside from I did this pilot batch and we had the class, and I came back on Monday to be like, oh, hey, I need to finally try the beer. They're like, oh, well, it's all gone already. It's like
It's sold out that night.
It's sold out that night. Or no, I'd had a little bit when I first tapped it, but I wanted to try more and see what people thought. I'm my own biggest critic. I'm like, it's not perfect. And I thought that first batch, the levels of especially sage, but like the sage was a bit too strong in that first one that needed to be dialed down. I'm expecting the nerd alert button. Okay. But yeah, everybody else loved it. I'm like, oh, geez, I guess it, all right. And developed it more, and when we first did a big batch of it and released it into the wild, like everybody who tried it was like, oh my God, this is so good. And we took it to Bexley Beer Fest, and
it won Best Beer at Bexley Brew Fest chosen by the people. So people voted. It was the People's Choice or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we won. There were 40, 50 breweries at the place, and each brewery had a couple of beers. And this was the beer chosen as the best beer by the people at
Incredible.
that festival.
yeah.
It's truly unlike any beer you've probably ever had.
So good.
Unless you've been to Iceland, it's very similar to one of the beers that I had there called Snorri, who's the guy who wrote the
Which of
Poetic
course
and
we
Prose
all,
Eddas,
we're all familiar with that beer.
Everyone is familiar with, well, if you're not familiar with the beer, you're at least familiar with the writer of the Poetic and Prose Eddas, correct?
Of course, obviously.
Clearly.
Yes.
The Norse sagas, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Okay, perfect.
The first time I had this beer was well before I started working here. And I don't know if you remember, I came to visit Pat and say hi.
You brought Lincoln down, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it was, I think, after your second batch or something. And I'm like, holy shit, this is so good. And I wanted to get a growler of it.
Yeah.
And you said no, because you're like, we can't sell
We
any in
don't.
growlers right now. We don't have
We
enough.
literally
it was still
have
a it was still a
Yeah.
pilot batch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So it was, I was just blown away. And then when I
Yeah.
got hired on at Endeavor, and, I'm like, okay, now
Yeah.
I can have it all the time. And then canned it,
Yeah.
this
So
is just life.
It's fun and exciting,
So good.
and people who've never had always ask, what's it? What's it like? It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah, I
like
told everybody about it.
anything.
I was like, I tried this beer, but I couldn't get any for you.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's like
check it out.
I can only do the pretentious thing of it's like sitting on my back patio on a nice fall afternoon,
or
it's
sitting on
kind
the
of
beach in the summertime with
Yeah.
the waves crashing. It's
I
that
guess.
too.
Well, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit a lot of things. I think
Summer, fall, winter.
It's funny
Gotta-
because in the summertime, people say it has a cooling effect from the star anise, and it's not over the top black licorice flavor. So people that
It's
don't like
not.
black licorice,
It's this
still try
weird
it. Yeah.
it literally
Yeah.
cools off your mouth. It's like menthol
And
almost.
so people in the summer will say, "Oh, this feels like winter, and it's cooling. Reminds me. Oh, it takes me back there in a pleasant way, right?" But then in the winter, because the sage is warming and herbal, it's like, "Oh, this is warming. It feels like summer, and
Yeah.
it takes me there in a good way." So it's really weird how it plays on your opposite season.
yeah.
All seasons.
Yeah,
It's
all
the
year long.
year-round beer.
It also finishes very clean. There isn't a lingering
Yeah.
bitterness or aftertaste or anything. So once you get these really interesting flavors, and then they just stop, and it's
Yeah.
really, really quite nice.
And it's also like the weirdest beer for pairing with food because it pairs so well with so many things that are so different from each other. It's not like, oh, yes, well, white wine, you pair that with like fish and pork. And sort of like this, yeah, you pair it with steak and with Thanksgiving dinner and with spaghetti. Yeah.
And scrambled eggs. No, I'm just kidding. Breakfast.
Actually, this would be really good. Yeah, like a breakfast for dinner. This would be really good with breakfast
like
for dinner.
Waffles and a spicy
chorizo
breakfast
omelet
burrito.
or something. Yeah.
Ooh, chicken and waffles. Oh,
With the maple. And
yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
So, are we bringing
It's
in food
probably
today,
one of my
or are we
most
just?
favorite beer. I mean,
it's a go-to for me as well. Yeah.
I love it. So what did you think when he first gave you those 3 things? Were you like, are you kidding me? Or were you like, challenge accepted? Did you have any thoughts initially? Like, oh yeah.
It was so long ago, it's tough to remember. I wasn't weirded out because frequently I'll be given one of those challenge. Because usually when I'm given a challenge, it's, and we'll talk more about this later, it's, oh, here's the cool hip trend that all the cool kids are doing. And I'm like, no, I've had all of those beers and I hate them all.
And it's not really for us. Like, we are nerds.
Yeah.
Nerd alert. So it's not for us what the cool hip kids are into, but what it is, and Carrie can speak to this, when someone keeps walking into a bar and say, what do you have that's hazy? And our bartenders don't have an answer to that. That's something that my challenge to Cameron is most of the time qualitative. It's not like make this style of beer. Mine is allow our bar staff to answer this question for the customer that we're seeing regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also too, like in a tap room, remembering that like our job, people come in and it's to give them an awesome product.
Yeah.
First, educate if desired second. So if someone comes in and asks for that hazy IPA, it's not on us to say, well, did you know? The laundry list of history behind.
And we're going to let Cameron rant about hazy IPAs.
I'll rant about that. But I mean, my one thing with that is that the flagship IPA, our Shaka, really was designed following the flavor profile of a hazy IPA. I was like, Tyler and I were hanging out. It's like, oh yeah, we should do a New England style. And we had it in tank and we poured samples of it and we're like, this is good. This tastes like what it's supposed to. And we look at it and it's nice and clear. It's like, but we can't call this New England style. We can't call it hazy because it's not hazy.
Right.
But like the people who like New England style IPAs because they're
gonna
big,
love the flavor.
It is meant to have that, like the people I know who say they're into the direction that hazy IPAs are going because they're more aromatic, they're more tropical fruit forward, restrained bitterness, that's what they're looking for, not necessarily the haze. And our Shaka does all of that. On the other hand, the guy who comes in asking, what do you have that's hazy, isn't going to be happy with that beer purely because it's not hazy.
Right.
Even though, like, if you handed him that in the glass and he drank it eyes closed, it would taste exactly like he wanted. And I love how I'm using he because I know that guy walking into a bar is a guy. Now, there is that woman who walks into a bar. And you know that woman.
Oh, yeah. We all know
But
that
she's
woman.
not going to ask, what do you have that's hazy?
Can I speak to your manager?
I like how on the list of employee allergies.
So I put, just to be safe, and I put in our office a list of all of our employees' allergies, and Miles, one of the bartenders, like
Karen's.
He self-filled that out.
Yeah. But you were asking what I was thinking when I made this. I was a little bit. Actually, my thing was like, can I get more of a clue on the flavor profile? Like, can you give me more description, please?
In my dream,
like, I know what it's like in my head, but I can't communicate to you. It's like, great. and my biggest fear, my biggest concern, which remained, that was like just when working with herbs and spices in a beer instead of hops, knowing what the right amount to throw in is really hard. And just like, oh God, I've never brewed with sage or star anise before, and I have no clue what the right proportion of each of those is going to be for it to not taste horrible. And like I said, the first batch, I'm like, it's too strong, but it's not, I'm not, it's too strong, but it's not undrinkable. I guess other people will be okay with it.
Yeah, we've had a few people. I know one of our normal fans, Alex, has always come back to he and his wife, especially his wife, keeps saying that, that first batch was the best. Because I think they liked a larger sage profile. So that one, I think, Carrie, you would try the second batch. Mm-hmm. And the first one was much more sage, but over the top. It was not a balanced beer, and it wasn't nearly as clean. So if you like sage and you like that as a stronger leading note, I can see how you'd prefer that beer. But a lot of people are turned off by sage too. So this beer is one thing that Cameron does really well in all of his beers is they're balanced. So often when I go into a brewery and I'm tasting different beers, it's rare to find a lot of balanced beers. A lot of times they're one notes, especially for the really flavor-forward beers. So you go in, there's a stout, and that's a roast malt. And it's one flavor that overpowers everything else. Yeah. And that's kind of the way the sage was at first. Maybe not that bad, but it was definitely strong.
Oh, yeah. Also, going into one of my mini rants, about like everybody having to put stuff in stout now. Like one of the things that bugs me is that coffee is like everybody's favorite thing to put in stout. And it's like, it's already roasty. Why are you putting roast flavor in your roast flavor? It's like, if you do a raspberry stout or a vanilla stout, cool. You're picking a complementary flavor. If you're at chocolate's a little weird. Chocolate walks the line.
Because you already have chocolate in a lot of stouts, depending on the malt.
But like stout and coffee, it's sort of like,
what's the point?
It's already there.
Yeah.
Can I get some coffee syrup in my coffee, please?
I like, so another brewery in town, Wolf's Ridge, and they do their Clear Sky Daybreak where they put coffee, but it's in a cream ale, basically.
It's a cream ale.
Base. And that's lovely idea. So props to them. Yeah. That's exactly what you're talking about, where you're picking complementary flavors that enhance and add and not overlap in weird ways and create problems with harmonics. Yeah.
It's just unnecessary.
Are we ready for the next beer? I'm ready for the next beer.
Cameron's ready.
I'm ready for the next beer.
Well, why don't you go ahead and so the challenge that Cameron was given for this beer.
Oh, wait. There you go. There we go. Oh yeah, that needs to be a button.
Yeah. We should probably make that a button too. We can get rid of the magic or what?
The delayed.
I mean, the magic button is pretty cool too.
Yeah.
We'll have to decide. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. Woo.
That's odd. Did we get the end of the run?
Possibly.
Huh.
Yeah, that seems strange. Well, let's try it out.
I mean, I'm sure it smells and tastes good.
Yeah, it's probably the end of the run or the bottom of the tank, because that was one of the top. That was the top case, so that would probably be the very end of the run.
So yeah, you all watching this, you get to see the like kind of obnoxious things we all do when we're sitting around together. I don't think that's got some hops in it.
That's
just true.
So we need to check.
Yeah, we may need to pull a couple.
Yeah, we will do that. Again,
we'll just have to open a bunch.
We will have to open a bunch. So I'm going to try another can.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or you want to dump that in there or something?
Absolutely.
Huh.
So what Cam is saying is trube or whatever. There's yeast sediment that will collect and settle at the bottom of the tank. So when we've cold conditioned and carbonated that beer, there will be a fine layer at the bottom. And so right at the very end of the tank when we're packaging out, the last little bit might kick some of that out with it, right? And so that's exactly what happened here.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it. It won't hurt you at all. It's actually people take brewer's yeast as a vitamin supplement because it contains B vitamins and a lot of other things. So you could sell this to people at Whole Foods and probably make a quick buck.
Yeah, but you can throw 2 asparagus stalks in a bottle of water and sell it to people at Whole Foods. So I don't think that counts. That looks a little better.
No, that's about like yours is, I think. So
I think that whole, I think whatever that.
We'll go back through the last case or so. So yeah, we'll do that.
Okay. Yeah.
So anywho,
Still gonna taste really
so
good.
this is the gall.
Yeah. It's still, you still get the honey on the nose. And yeah, so this was about 2 years ago, I think. The perceived new hot thing in beer IPAs. This is just before the haze craze, I think, right?
No, this was well after the haze craze.
Was after haze craze has been around? Okay.
Haze craze was around since we were starting Endeavor, or just before even.
Yeah, I think it's really taken off in the last couple years. You know what I mean? It's I don't know. Anywho, the Brute IPA, right? Was this
which was cool
thing.
for a summer.
And almost a couple of the original ones were really good. So we were like, oh, this is gonna be the next phase. But most of the ones that came out were just awful, you know.
Yeah.
And so our thing, well, hey Cameron, what do you think about doing this style of beer? No one else locally is doing one. It's getting some national attention as a style. Why not? And this is
Like, because I've had a couple of them and they were horrible. The when I'm challenged to do cool hip things, like I think we've had 2 really good beers come out of like me being challenged, like this is the cool thing. Like, I hate that trend. I mean, that was effectively the story behind the hammock as well, like being challenged to do hazy, and I don't like the direction most hazies go. Because, like I talked about earlier with...
Elisa asked, can I bring y'all some drinks?
Yeah, because we don't have enough here as it is.
That's awesome.
Maybe later. Because the good thing about the New England hazy styles is the flavor profile. And I already did a beer doing that, but what so many people asking for hazy is literally just the cloudiness. And I got tired of being like, no, I'm not going to make a beer that's cloudy for the sake of it being cloudy. And eventually like, fine, it's like, you want cloudy? You know what's cloudy? Hefeweizens are cloudy. I'll make it IPA with Hefeweizen yeast and all these like fruity things. Like, we'll call it a banana daiquiri IPA. Does this make you happy? And put it on tap. And it's like, this beer's really good. And I'm like,
and for your pleasure,
damn it is really good. Okay,
it's really good.
It is really good.
It's really
and it was
our
like
hammock or banana hammock. Banana daiquiri.
There are no dick
hazy
jokes at the brewery.
IPA. It's also 6.9%.
There are no dick jokes in the brewery. Never. Where was I going with this?
So
so brewed IPAs.
The trends. Producing.
Yeah. When I like
beers?
when I look at them and don't do the trend, but like somehow when I mock the trend, but
your tweaked version of
my tweaked version of the trend. So with the brewed IPAs,
Cameron's been accused of being really into tweaking. Or twerking?
Twerking.
Is that, yeah.
I think I twerked before I would tweak. So what I latched onto is like, okay, I don't like brewed IPAs, but I like Belgian Brut Reserve. So I'll take a Belgian Brut Reserve and a brewed IPA and kind of mash them together. And if you've never had a Belgian Brut Reserve, go try one.
You have an example that someone might find
I do have an example. I was having a conversation with like people online the other day, and somebody asked me like, if you could pick, it was like a cool verse, like not what's your favorite beer. It was if you could pick a beer that everyone needs to try, what would it be? It's like, ooh, that's a cool question, because like not what's your favorite, not what's the best. What does everyone need to try? And the one I came up with was a Belgian Brut Reserve, and my answer for that is Deus. It is Deus Brutus Flandres, Brut of Flanders. So a Brut being a dry, sparkling white wine, of which champagne is the popular style. And it is brewed in Belgium. It's like 11% alcohol. And then after it's brewed in Belgium, they put it in tanks and they ship it to Champagne, France, where it is finished where it is bottle conditioned and finished in the full champagne method in a champagne style, where they do the riddling of the bottles.
That was that case you guys had me call around and track down.
Did we do that?
During COVID, I remember I was calling and finding out where to get it from.
And did we ever locate that?
Did you ever locate it?
We did. We ordered it.
Oh, good.
Did we ever
What?
get it?
Didn't we?
I don't remember.
Did
I
we
would have
drink it
known
and
if we
forget
had any in here. I would remember
Oh,
if we
no, we never got that.
I thought
I'm just kidding. No, I actually
maybe we
honestly didn't.
maybe we didn't order it. Maybe we just
didn't
meant to
follow.
order it.
Okay, well,
I
let's see
would
if we can
remember
figure
if
out
we
who
had.
distributes that
'Cause
locally.
I remember talking about that during shutdown.
It
We talked
could-
about a lot of things during shutdown, though.
It wouldn't surprise me. Like, I wonder if it is getting weird to get because the brewery that makes it got bought by AB InBev a couple years ago. And so because of that, like, that brewery was originally distributed by one distributor.
That would be a different distributor.
And now because it's InBev and InBev was with another distributor, if it got lost in the shuffle, because the same brewery that also makes my all around favorite beer, which is Triple Carmelite, and I've been looking for that. I have not been able to find that for years, and it drives me nuts. And I wonder if it fell through the cracks with distributors because of that. But yeah,
obviously there's very high demand for both of these.
Yeah, obviously very high demand for both of these beers. There should be. They're so good. I got.
Do you remember your first time having it?
Deus? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't. When did I get that? It blew my mind when I had it. And that's why I said, like, this is a beer that everybody needs to try because it will explode. It will explode your perceptions of what a beer can be. They call it a brut, as in a dry sparkling white wine, and you're like, yeah, that's pretentious. Like, oh my god, it tastes like a like it's everything good about beer, and everything good about champagne. And to me as a brewer, one of the things that impresses me isn't just like putting big flavor in a beer is easy to do. You can always put more in. What's harder is to do a flawless beer, to do a beer without faults. And this is a beer that is both, flavorful, it's full and flavorful and interesting, but it's also not something that has, but it's also flawless. There's also like nothing where faults are hiding behind.
Because oftentimes if you have a big, bold, strong flavor, it can mask faults.
Yeah.
Right? So the more bitter, the more extreme a single flavor is, the more it can cover up things that are flaws. And the less in balance it is, and therefore it is flawed by not being balanced.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so anyway, this is a beer that I love. I'm like, whatever, I will do a tribute to one of my favorite beers and mix that with the brewed IPA style, which, so I did a bunch of work. We had a Belgian style triple on at the time, and I knew I wanted to use that yeast strain because it would handle the high alcohol content I was going for. Because if you go for there will be, putting this in words like you should push anyway.
Awkward.
Because alcohol will stress.
There we go.
Because alcohol content will stress yeast out, and you'll start to get off flavors, and the yeast won't be happy. So you need a yeast strain that can to do a really high alcohol beer. You need a yeast strain that will handle that kind of alcohol content. So I knew I wanted it to be a Belgian style. Plus, it was going to be a Belgian Brut Reserve. And then I took all of the hops that we had in the back, and I'm sitting there with a dozen bags of hops open with like a glass and just like take a sip and like stick my nose in one bag of hops and take a sip and stick my nose in another bag of hops. I picked the hops that like where the aromas of the hops played best with the flavors of that yeast strain. And when it was done, you wouldn't be able to tell where the yeast notes left off and the hop notes kicked in. And like, I like, oh my God, I feel so pretentious right now talking about my
I'm just
beer.
picturing you sitting in a circle, like, you know, with all these hops and everything around you. Just
No, it was
Clothing
me
optional,
Your
just,
Zen
you know.
mode.
Yeah.
Maybe you
He's
have
like-
like
He's
you
got
know.
Trube like painted on his face.
Yeah.
And, you
like
know.
a bandana here, and you're like,
More likely it was going to be like me taking up half the the area behind the bar and like a bartender like standing there like I've got customers, can you like get out of my way? No, I wasn't doing that when we had people behind the bar or when we had anybody at the bar. I wouldn't go that crazy when there's people at the bar. So yes, so I mixed up these two, and we did a pilot batch. And and then with the brewed IPA thing, one of the key things with that style is adding special enzymes to break down all of the leftover unfermentable sugars into fermentable sugars, so the beer gets really, really dry. So this is our driest beer that we have. It is less dense than water.
I'm getting my mind around that.
Yeah. Well, because like normally beer is more dense than water because sugar makes it more dense, but because alcohol is less dense than water is, if you ferment all of the sugar in a beer, you will get a density, all or nearly all of the sugars in a beer, you will get a density less than water. So this has very, very little residual sugar. And
I think pure alcohol is like 80% the density of pure water, I believe, or thereabouts. Fact check that.
These are one of those things that like I'll look up if I need to.
Yeah, and that's just a very rough number, but I think that's more or less accurate. So, you know, if you ferment everything out, then yeah, you're going to get south of that specific gravity of 1. You know?
Yeah.
So did
that's
you
gall.
always intend for it to be the high gravity, or was that like
Yeah, my goal, my target with like being a brute reserve was 9 to 12% alcohol, and I really wanted to get around 10 or 11. I really wanted to get into the double digits. If I got like 9.5%, I wasn't going to be like, damn it, it's only 9.5% alcohol.
I remember that first conversation too, because, you know, not all the brutes were this big of a beer, but we'd also talked about, well, we can do an imperial. We've never done anything this big. So let's try to do 2 for 1, you know, and kind of really hybridize several of those styles. And you had the inspiration of the Brute Reserve and, you know, bringing all that kind of stuff into it. And it's just a fantastic beer.
And there's also one of the things that like, especially at my previous head brewer position, you know, getting a, I know I've had a reputation with like other people in the, you know, craft drinkers in the local market being like, oh yeah, well, you know, they're good, but they never really go out. They never get any extreme. They're always like stuff that's plain like, fine, here, have double-digit alcohol content without doing anything, without barrel aging or anything like that.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny that I've heard some people say,
Mic
try to do something different. And you know, typically when someone says that, they're like, why aren't you taking a box of Lucky Charms and throwing it into your beer, or getting Swiss Miss hot chocolate marshmallows and throwing them in there,
or putting a new beer out every month,
every week or every other day, you know, for some people. And a lot of times they're just playing games, and they're really playing marketing games. And that's not from our point of view. And I want you to talk about that, Cameron, but that's not creativity in brewing.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially a while back. Sorry, I'm having flashbacks of the bad old days. So Scott and I were both, I don't know how deep into those weeds we want to go. We were both associated with another brewery that we had.
we all were.
We all were. Oh God, yeah.
Involved with,
We're all involved with a brewery that we have feelings about. But that's sideways to this story.
We'll all come
And
back together.
Yeah.
But in any case, even then I was involved with developing the new recipes and, getting to like, well, this other popular, quickly growing Ohio brewery puts out 2 new beers every week. It's like, if they're doing 2 in a week, they're not new. So I have a lot of pride in what I do. And it depends what you mean by new. Like, you can slap a new name on something. Does that make it new? Like, if you're a burger joint and it's like, oh, well, this burger has pickles and this burger doesn't have pickles. Is it a new burger?
It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We took our
seasoning on the burger.
We took our regular cheeseburger and we took off the cheddar cheese and we put on Swiss cheese. Now it's a new burger.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And we were talking about this just a little while ago with our customer Ben, who's one of our biggest Gall fans actually, and how many other small breweries, for a variety of reasons, some of them good, some of them not, they have one house yeast strain, they have one base grain, and that's kind of what they do. And so a lot of them, especially places that have 15 beers and a dozen of them are IPAs, and they change one hop, and it's a new beer. Or they dump a fruit. They buy a couple gallons of fruit puree and dump it in there. It's a new beer, and they buy a bunch of crap and they dump it in there and they call it a new beer. They change one item. And with every beer that Cameron makes, with every beer that we make, we really design it from the ground up and consider the yeast, the grain, the hops, and how all of those play together. And the decision is always from the bottom up.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, so so what I want to do when I'm making a new beer is to make a new beer. Every one of the beers we've got on tap tastes different. You're not going to drink we've now got 3 IPAs on tap. If we have, if we have multiple IPAs on tap, you could have those put in. I want it to be that if those beers are put blind in front of anyone, like that anyone's like, oh, here's blind. Here these are blind. Here's a quick description of what they are. Anybody should be able to taste those and be like, oh, well, I know exactly which is which. Those all taste completely different from each other. And making something that is truly unique and different and new and different is tough to do. It takes work to develop. And especially if you want it to also be good, like the Saga. That took me several iterations of Pilot Brew to dial in that recipe. We could have done the first batch, the recipe of the first batch, and just did a full-scale batch of it, but it wouldn't really have been good. It took time and multiple pilot batches to experiment to get it up to what it was. So the Gall, it was one pilot batch, and we tried, and we're like, oh, this is really good. But we still needed to test it out on our pilot system to be sure it would be good. We didn't want to we could have skipped that stage and released a beer, and maybe it would be good, and maybe it wouldn't. And I'm not a fan of doing that. I think that anything that comes off of our full-scale system should be fully tested.
It really is the difference between thoughtful creation and just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, And if your intent is to make a new beer every week or several every week or whatever it might be, then guess what? You're probably never going to make that same beer again. So you really don't care about dialing anything in, about getting it balanced, or really if it's any good or not, because once it's gone, and on to the next thing. And, it's kind of the idea that you can kind of free for all, and occasionally you hit something decent, but you're never really refining your craft. You're never really honing in. You're never really developing something with depth or quality.
Yeah. I think if we went to it straight to the full-scale system, you'd either end up with either it could be good, but it's not going to be new because you're taking an existing recipe and just like changing one ingredient and giving it a new name, in which case it's good, but it's not really new. Or it's new, but it might not really be good. Or it might, but then it's luck and just like, you're rolling the dice on whether that full-scale batch is going to be good or not. Now, we'll do that with pilot batches, and, if a pilot batch isn't good or isn't popular, I mean, that's another thing. We've had really good pilot batches that move slowly because, Rauch beer isn't the popular thing.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy working here, being around you guys, even years ago and now. Not only the beer is really, really outstanding, I always relate everything back to food in my mind. Like you can get a steak anywhere. Can you get a good steak everywhere? Nope. And also how it relates to marketing, and what people ultimately think about first and make their priority. The fact that you think about the beer as in-depth as you do before you're even concerned, how are we going to market this? how are we going to
that's not my job.
How are we going to, or like, how are we going to get people to, see and hear, the depth of what you're putting together, that your goal is to simply put together the best beer possible. Not, I have this idea for a marketing campaign. What can we slap behind it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you see it when you go, like you said, your analogy where you put all three IPAs in front of each other. I don't prefer IPAs. I'm a lager, Kolsch, like I like the Saga. I'm more light, in my preferences. But I love all of these IPAs, all of them. And my husband, who is an IPA person, loves all the IPAs. It's the weirdest phenomenon ever. That like you can
that
actually
people who like beer all like good beers.
Exactly. My mind is blown. You go to a brewery in a place and it's like, I'm not getting an IPA from there. Like, no thanks. Most of the time if they don't have a lager on draft or a Kolsch or something like that, which a lot of places don't even, I'm like, all right, do a porter, stout, and amber, something in that range. But the fact that like anybody who just likes really good beer will appreciate it, whether you're that avid IPA drinker or somebody like me who sways the other way in my preferences, I like it because it's good. It's just good, Everybody likes a good steak.
That's what I've said too. You mentioned
except for vegans.
Yeah.
Well, they would.
If they had a really, really good steak, like
they'd realize the mistakes they're making with their lives.
Someone who typically
the missed steaks.
Someone who typically eats seafood, if they go to a spot with a really good steak, they're still gonna love it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about, like something that is really just good.
And another point that I should make with the beers I like to do is I'll draw inspiration from and pay homage to some of my favorite beers. But I don't want to just copy anything. Or like the closest I'll come to that is if I'm being, Jack Black's character from High Fidelity, and like I could tell you my influences. It's like you've probably never heard of my influences. And people are like, try me. I'm like, this tiny brewery in Berlin, this tiny brewery in Berlin, this brewery in Prague, and this brewery in a small town in Minnesota. Like, I've never heard of any of those. It's like I've never even heard of those places.
Where's Minnesota?
Told you, Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Did they produce anything good except for Prince?
Snow.
F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Snow.
Yeah, they produced a lot of Snow. F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of good camping.
Yeah.
Good fishing,
really good,
I hear.
really good wildlife.
Ice fishing. Okay.
I actually really like Minnesota.
I know. I say that facetiously.
cousin-
I love
awesome
my
accents.
I love my friends in
My
Minnesota.
cousin Maggie is a graduate of the fine university there as well. So, my cousin
Although,
Tommy
like,
from Duluth up there, there's a lot of good stuff up there actually.
Chicago
love
is only
Minnesota.
the windy city because people who live there have never been to Minneapolis.
No doubt.
Yeah. Chicago is the windy city. I like go to Minneapolis and I'm like literally leaning into the wind. Like
At least in
I have
Chicago,
seen.
you have some.
Yeah. Just be the city of big shoulders. That's fine. Don't say windy. They're not that far away from you. You're on the same lake. Where was I going with that?
Your influences.
Small
My influences.
breweries.
Oh yeah.
I'll pay homage to your influence.
I'll pay homage to my favorite places, but I'm not going to copy something, especially something that's good. You know, to call out another good local brewery. People are like, I love Bodhi. You should do a beer like Bodhi. I'm like, why? Why am I going to do?
And it's really
like,
good.
Yeah.
Bodhi exists and it's really good. Like, I'm not going to do like. Why would I copy Bodhi when there's already Bodhi? I could do something and take inspiration from Bodhi, but like if I want Bodhi, I'll drink Bodhi.
Right.
Like, you know,
So simple.
I guess what? I go to bottle shops and I buy beers that aren't mine because they're good.
Yeah.
And you know what? Sometimes I go to a bottle shop and buy a beer because I'm like, yeah, this is a better version of this style than anything I could make. You know, like to use my music analogy, it's sort of like, you know, you can listen to multiple bands. Like every band sounds like themselves. Like you don't, you know, Led Zeppelin wouldn't be better if they tried to cover Prince. That could be fun.
I would actually really
I would
like
pay good
that.
money for that. Like,
Really
okay, that's a bad analogy. Oh, and Prince, if he covered Let's.
I think the point you're making is that so a band or a beer is fantastic when it has its own sense of what it is.
Yeah.
And in the market, whether that's beer or music or any sort of artistic expression, there are copycats.
Yeah.
And what they do is they go after and they're just like, oh, let's just try to make that. And a lot of times it's coming from it just trying to copycat, or it's a marketing decision, right? And it's led by, hey, we are leading with our portfolio of these 12 IPAs that should have these names and flavor profiles. And Brewmaster, here you go. Use these keyword hops that are really popular right now and go. And it's all just sort of a marketing decision, or it's a copycattery based on selling trends that this beer's selling really well. Let's clone it and release it and market it as such.
Yeah. I mean, that sort of gets into like, I've talked about that with you guys before, like people put craft beer in competition with macro beer. Like it's craft versus macro. It's craft versus macro. And like the definitions of that have to do with size and being independently owned. And I'm like, there are good craft breweries that are really big. Like the definition of craft brewer, like the size you can be, keeps growing and growing and growing. Like the size of
it's whatever Sam Adams produced
whatever
the previous year.
Sam Adams
just
is.
above that.
Yeah. But great breweries like Sierra Nevada are now way bigger than what the max limit on what you could be and still be a craft brewery were 15, 20 years ago. But they're still a craft brewery. That like their size isn't what makes them a craft brewery. And there's the whole being independently owned. And that's weird too, because like you get Lagunitas. Lagunitas isn't independently owned. Are they suddenly less craft than they used to be?
Yeah, and it's funny that we're starting to see that in the local market too. Like, what does independent ownership mean? Because there's now certain restaurant groups that have invested in helping open up several small breweries that are part of a parent package company. They're still considered craft beer, and they're very small scale, and they're independently operated, but they're kind of invested and largely opened by a central group.
Yeah.
You know,
so what is
that? Is that independent ownership? I don't know. It depends on what you're doing. Like, what's the liquid like? What are your intentions?
Right.
What's the marketing? You know.
So to me, the real distinction that matters to me isn't craft versus macro. To me, I think of it as craft beer versus marketing beer.
I thought you were going to say good beer versus bad.
Well, marketing beer can be good.
Just because it's
No, good beer versus bad beer.
That's the really important one is good beer versus bad beer. Yeah. But to me, the opposite of craft.
There's some great marketing.
There's some great marketing beer. Well,
great beer behind them.
Yeah, I mean,
Jolly Pumpkin's a great example of that. Like, you can have your own opinions on sours and stuff like that. I love the beer, and I love their marketing.
I love the beer, and good beer and good marketing aren't at odds. It's not that. See, Jolly Pumpkin to me is they're still a craft brewery.
Yeah.
I won't name names of.
A really good example of that is Oscar Blues, for example, out of Colorado. So when I was in school in Boulder, Colorado, in the late '90s, turn of the millennium, aging myself. Oscar Blues was a brew pub. It was a little brew pub up in Lyons, Longmont, Colorado, just northeast of Boulder there. And so I left Colorado. I was in South America for several years, and I went back, and all of a sudden, Oscar Blues was everywhere. They were the first brewery to put craft beer into cans. And they became the third largest brewery in Colorado after Coors in New Belgium, Fat Tire, through this amazing, aggressive marketing campaign. But they had already existed for decades, making really good beer. It's not the best beer you're ever going to have, but it's really good, and they're doing a good job, and their marketing was exactly what resonated well in the market at that time. You know what I mean? And getting away from kind of the hoity-toityness and put it in a can and be a little edgy and and they took over Great American Beer Fest by handing out Mardi Gras beads with their cans on it that you could put your glass in and walk around. I mean, fantastic. They blew up in a matter of a few years because of their marketing. Yeah.
So a craft brewery can have good marketing, and a marketing brewery can have good beer. But it's which comes first and what's there to support the other. Right. A craft brewery, what comes first is what's inside the can or bottle or keg. And then the marketing that you slap on the outside is there to support the liquid on the inside. And a marketing brewery is one where what comes first is the label and the marketing campaign. It's what you put on the outside of the bottle or can. And the liquid that goes into it is there to support your marketing campaign. And that, to me, is the difference between a marketing brewery and a craft brewery. And that can be any size. Sierra Nevada and New Belgium, great breweries. Big breweries. Huge. Craft, great marketing. They're still craft breweries because what they're doing first is making good beer. And then they have Jolly Pumpkin. They've got great marketing, but it's about the liquid first. It's the passion for the craft first.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And there are small breweries everywhere that are just marketing companies. And the liquid is kind of an afterthought. It's all about a lifestyle and those sort of things. And it doesn't matter about size. You can have a tiny little one down the street, or you can have a huge global conglomerate.
Market trends say that the most popular beer style is in this market is this, and if we do it like that, then and you still want it to be good. You don't want it to be crap beer. But
like one of the biggest craft breweries in Ohio that's grown, one of the fastest growing.
Do we want to name names that people wouldn't think about otherwise?
And I'm not sure if this is. So I'm going to be fairly.
That's good.
I'm going to be fairly complimentary of them in the sense that they make pretty darn good liquid. Like they hired good people that know what they're doing.
Good people.
They treat their people well.
They do.
They're a well-run company. They bought really good equipment.
They hold high standards of quality.
Control. It was started by a marketing company in California and chosen because of a national distribution agreement that was here. So it was tens of millions of dollars in venture capital to make money in the craft brewing industry. Now, they've gone about it the right way, set up the company, take care of their people, invest. So the liquid is good, and they treat their people well. It's a well-run company, and I've got respect for them. But if you consider it a local craft, grassroots, bootstrap kind of thing, it simply is not. So it's sort of like your expectations. I mean, if you want something to be truly locally owned and you know the person, the brewer and everyone involved, that's not that company. But if you want a good beer, you could do worse.
You could do worse.
Yeah.
I think that's the weird thing.
I like how we talked about exactly who we're talking about and never said their name.
I think that's the thing that's interesting, though, is just be authentic in who you are, what you are, where you come from. And if your product is good, it's not going to matter.
Exactly.
Don't
well, with an educated consumer base, it's not going to matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is, and we're all susceptible
But that's
to marketing.
part of your marketing campaign.
Yeah.
That should be part of how you market it is, because whether you're local or not, people respect honesty and integrity and just being honest and upfront and authentic, regardless of if you're local or from somewhere else. There's great beer across the country that, like you said, like we go and we drink because we like it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be local for us to say, well, because you're supporting businesses, and those businesses are supporting people, supporting families, supporting communities. So it all matters, and it's all just, I don't know, just be authentic.
Yeah.
Just be honest.
Be real. Yeah.
Yeah. And if your product's good enough, it shouldn't hurt it. But if you have to use trickery, then, you might feel, I don't know, inadequate in some way. I don't know if that's the right word or
Compensation.
not. No dick jokes. Remember.
There was none made, Carrie. What are you talking about? Yeah. I mean, it's heady, nerdy stuff we're talking about here. But I mean, it's true that I think we're all very passionate about what we do here, and I think that shows, and we shouldn't be afraid to show that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what else do you think about this beer, Cameron? What did we talk about? What it tastes like? Did we talk about those notes?
Oh God, we didn't take. One of the things I think about this is that I'm really glad we've got it in cans now because it's 11% alcohol, and I never got a chance to drink that much of it before because it was only on tap, and it's sort of like I can't drink a pint of this and then get home. I can't drive across town after drinking of as much of this as I would like. So now I can take it home in a can and get drunk at home.
Perfect.
Yes. So what does it taste like? Yeah, we should talk about flavor notes.
So actually, Cameron, what I would love for you to do is start from square one and talk about how you taste a beer. Talk about the glass you're using. Talk about the things you're looking for with your eyes, with your nose.
Well,
with
in that
parts
case,
of your mouth.
I might need a new fresh can.
Well, that is rather doable. There's actually, this is open. Do you want?
Is it? Oh, yeah, we're good. We're good. I just need more than the 2 fingers at the bottom of this. So this is a very special glass. So first thing, what glass I put in. People have asked this. Glassware is really important to tasting beer. Most of what we perceive as flavor is really aroma. Our mouths, our tongues only taste 5 fundamental flavors: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, which is savory. It's like the flavor of dried shiitake mushrooms. Very umami. Everything else we taste is aromas, is smells. So the shape of the glass has a huge effect on where those smells hit you. You want something that you can get your nose in to get all the smells. Drinking from a can is bad because, there's literally aluminum between my nose and the beer. I literally can't smell it as well. After that, straight-walled glasses, shaker.
They call them shaker pints. They're designed.
I mean, but your classic solo cup is a straight-walled cup. Your standard wedge-shaped straight-walled cup isn't going to hold aromas. So our standard bar glasses here, because it's got like a bell like that holds the aromas in there. You can get your nose in it. This is a special fancy glass. Like this, yeah. I would feel pretentious about this, except that pretentious means you're like pretending to be something you aren't, and I really am this nerdy.
Nerd alert.
So this is a special IPA glass, and
Made by a company Spiegelau out of Germany.
Yeah.
The Germans.
And this is specifically an IPA glass. The top is meant to be like a cannon that funnels all those aromas to your nose. The like scalloping along the bottom is so that as you drink it, it agitates the carbonation and releases carbonation because the carbonation will carry the aromas up out of the glass. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm looking at it, which this is obviously the very end of the run. And I feel bad putting this on camera because this is not what the beer is going to look like for everybody else who gets it.
How about I go grab
why don't you...
glass.
Do you want to...
Yeah.
You want to take that? Okay. And while you're doing that, we'll just talk shit about you while you're gone.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Cool. So yeah, now that I'm not talking about how to taste beer,
well, we can talk about the glass.
We can talk about the glass.
So, also, it's a thinner glass.
It's a thinner glass.
So how it conducts heat,
yeah,
it's gonna be different.
Which is, and like the weird thing, like I know you mentioned this earlier. Weirdly, thinner glass slows down how quickly the beer picks up heat.
Right.
Which is weird.
Yep.
Although note on that, like this beer definitely tastes better as it warms up a bit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So.
And also like the glass and how it's cut. So like if you take like a regular pint glass, and the best way to do this is like hold it up in the bottom, and you're gonna get like some green and blue tints and colors to it. If you have the Spiegelau, you're gonna have no color at all. So that's essentially like no matter how clean you get the glass, there's little pockets in the glass that, you know.
Here's what it actually looks like.
I'm gonna go back I'm gonna go back to the Saga, I think. It's a little strong for me.
It is a little strong. Okay, so I'm looking at it. I'm judging the color and the clarity, although I'm more just observing that than judging, because color is just what the color is. I'm appreciating it. What I am looking at with the clarity on this and noticing is there's a very light haze to it. It's not like you all can't see that, and a lot of that haze is just the condensation on the glass. But so I can tell this beer definitely wasn't filtered, because there's still a little bit of cloudiness to it, but it's fairly bright. So like, oh wow, yeah, this is a beer that wasn't filtered but was given time to age. Obviously, if it's a Hefeweizen, then like, well, that's meant to be a bit cloudy. The Saga is meant to be a bit cloudy. Also, with swirling it, I'll sort of look at the rings it makes, which will tell me, like, so that nice lacing at the top of that glass tells me that there's a healthy amount of protein in this, but not a ton. That gives me an idea of what the mouthfeel is going to be. Oh, God, I'm a nerd. So then I'll smell it. And I'll pick up the aromas in that. So, oh my gosh, what am I? So I get like pineapple. What am I getting? I think I'm getting guava in this.
I get honey in a big way.
Yeah, there's definitely honey. So this is also a fun beer because it's got a lot of both yeast, hop, and malt notes like that. Honey is definitely a malt note, and that's what I'm I'm like right now I am personally looking at the malt note after the yeast and after the yeast and hop aromas. So I get like a lot of pineapple and guava and apricot.
Yeah, some stone fruit apricot.
Yeah, some stone fruit apricot.
Yeah.
And then I'll take a small sip just to coat my mouth, because you're not going to really tell with the first sip. You're like getting acclimated to it.
One small hint too is that when I'm smelling with my nose, like try opening your mouth.
Yeah.
While you smell, and sometimes I close open a little bit, because that actually allows more to go back in your passageway and gives you a better sense of what's going on. And that's true for food, drink, and not just beer, but
that brings that honey, that brings the malt notes forward more. Yeah, that's interesting.
And so I like doing it both ways, like mouth closed, mouth open, smell a few times, taste a few times, keep doing that, and you look really weird. With whiskey tasting, you often like aerate, where you go like, and then make this horrible sucking sound while blurbling out the side of your mouth. And sure, works for beer. Necessary for whiskey, not necessarily for beer.
Also, one of the I do get a little bit of an alcohol note in this, not a ton, but
well,
it's 11%.
It is 11%. Yeah.
So I took a small sip to get used to it, and then I'll take a good sip. And when I do, I'll hold it in my mouth for a bit and let the heat of my mouth, it's like getting really nerdy, the heat of my mouth warm up the beer, and as it warms up, it will, the carbonation will make the beer start to fill my mouth. And then once I feel it like foam up and fill my mouth, then I'll swallow. No dick jokes.
I'm gonna spit this out.
And
how's that mouth feel?
Mouth feels good.
Yeah.
This is not intended for small children. We've made sure with YouTube policy. Yeah.
Well, we're not using any dirty words.
We've used a couple, but not too bad. We
not,
didn't have
well,
to.
In this conversation, we're not using any dirty words.
How many did we allow on our
We talked
last
about like
week?
3 to 5, and
5.
like we dropped one in the first couple of minutes. We talked about having like an inflatable club that we could start beating people with. It would be called our fuck stick, and it would just be if you say a word, then you start beating them with it.
Yeah. But I give it several seconds afterwards, because it takes time for like you get the initial flavors. Call it early palate, mid palate, and late palate flavors. And sort of what's happening is that, oh gosh, getting nerdy. Like,
nerd alert.
The aromatics after you swallow are going up. Like your nasal passages don't just. God, this sounds so gross. Your nasal passages connect like the front to the back, so you can smell. It's like when you burp and you can smell it. So you're smelling both at the front and at the back after you swallow.
I feel like we need those
diagram.
body diagrams in your doctor's
like
office, and you can have
class.
like a pointer, so here, your
the
nasal passage goes up the back of your head, and you're smelling it at the back of your brain. At the same time, you're swallowing it and holding it in your mouth. You guys got all that? Okay.
Anyway, so getting all the flavors with this, and there are a lot of flavors with this.
Yeah.
I get to me, like, the honey is there, but I really get the honey as as support to all the fruit flavors. I think of fruit first with this, and I think pineapple and stone fruit the most, and I get a little bit of guava in it as well, which is weird, because I remember when we did the first batch, I didn't put down guava as one of my tasting notes, but now
it's definitely there.
It's definitely there.
It's odd because it's such a bold beer, but it's also very delicate.
Yeah.
It's very nuanced and soft, and as you warm it up, actually, so when any beer or any liquid is ice cold, it inhibits your ability to taste and perceive those flavors and aroma. And so as it starts warming up, you get a lot more of those nuances as well.
Yeah. And this,
And
like,
it's also how you can tell a good beer.
yeah. I like that. And this beer is like kind of weird and throws you because like, it's big and it's flavorful, but because it's so dry, like you normally expect a beer this big to be thick and heavy, and it's totally not. It's totally not. And
Dangerous.
it's dangerous. And it's simultaneously flavorful but light. Like none of these aren't, they're strong flavors, but they're not punch you in the face flavors, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It absolutely does.
Like,
It's kind of like a philosophy that you might have on the best beers.
yeah. Yeah. So yes, my philosophy on the best beers is that the best beers are ones that reward attention but don't demand it. So you often get your two extremes. You get your big macro beers, not just marketing, but macro beers that it's. I'll drink a Bud Heavy.
I'll take the Coors Banquet.
Yeah, the Coors Banquet is surprisingly good.
Shockingly solid.
Shockingly
ice
good.
cold.
Cold
Ice
especially.
cold, yes.
Like, it's if it's a hot day, if you're tailgating, like that's an enjoyable beer. However, you're not going to the correct beer for enjoying Coors Banquet
You want
is
it out
this
of the can
Spiegelau
or out of the
with-
bottle, ice cold. You're not going to put it in a fancy glass.
or in the 22-ounce straight wall, opaque plastic cup from the guy carrying it with the strap
stadium.
around his neck at the stadium.
Yep.
Ice cold. You're not going to warm it up. You're not going to really look for the nuances. It's not rewarding your attention. You're not going to pair it with a nice salmon fillet, because it's not going to complement a nice salmon fillet. No. And then
Culinary expert.
yeah.
No.
And then you've got beers that hopefully reward your attention, but demand your attention. Like they're big in your face craft beers, and they're
Sometimes
good.
they reward your attention.
Sometimes the good one. Good
They
ones.
reward your attention for that one beer.
Yeah.
Well,
even-
it depends on the beer we're
It
talking
depends on the beer.
Sometimes. Yeah.
We could pick on Jolly Pumpkin.
Yeah.
Jolly Pumpkin
Yeah.
really rewards your attention. That's really good beer.
Yeah.
However,
You're not like, hey, can I get a growler of this before I go to the game?
you're not sitting there with a keg of Jolly Pumpkin tailgating, just like
No.
It also kind of demands your attention.
it demands your
Absolutely.
attention.
Yeah.
It's like,
And-
pay attention to me.
Yeah. And I mean, it depends on the Jolly Pumpkin. You might pair Jolly Pumpkin with a good salmon fillet, but there's a lot of
Yeah.
pick that good barrel-aged imperial stout.
Yeah.
You're not pairing that
Right.
good barrel-aged imperial stout with that salmon fillet because it's going to overwhelm it.
Right.
It's good,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not kicking back at the tailgate. You're
And
not.
some things are meant to be good in that moment.
They are.
You know, like chocolate cake is good.
Yeah.
In that moment, you're not gonna
Yeah.
eat it all day or
Sure.
have multiple pieces of chocolate cake. I
sure.
mean, sometimes, but
And
you know.
sometimes some drinks stand alone. You don't want to pair them with anything. Much like
Yeah.
food, there are foods
Yeah.
that you want to pair. There are other foods that you don't necessarily want to pair. That
Yeah.
this is meant to be consumed independent
Right.
of other
Right.
flavors.
Or some scotches or whiskeys
Yeah.
100%.
or wines, like I think of Jolly Pumpkin and those Old Rasputin and like those
Yeah.
big, bold as kind of dessert.
And I,
You know what I mean?
and I love those beers.
Yeah.
They're great beers, but to me, as good as they are, they don't quite elevate to being the best beers. because they reward your attention,
Yeah.
but they also demand your attention.
Right.
Whereas this and my favorite beers that I think are the best reward your attention but don't demand your attention. That Deus that I talked about, like, this is what I think everyone should try. Like that, you could sit there and you could just like pour it at a fancy hoity-toity. You could pour the like. A girlfriend of my dad's used to hobnob with VIPs. She would pour like $300 bottles of champagne and do tastings for like VIPs at the Indianapolis 500. You know, high rollers showing them off fancy champagnes they didn't appreciate, but you know,
they liked them because they were $300
at the Indianapolis 500. Yeah.
Well, they're not the people who are going and doing that.
Yeah.
No, like if you sit in a
no
box.
judgment button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you're one of the people sitting in those boxes,
I hear you.
Anyway.
You want $300.
You're drinking $300 bottle of champagne. But she's tried
Johnny
a bunch
Walker
of good stuff, and I put down this $50 bottle of beer, and like, oh my god, $50 for a bottle of beer. I mean, 750 milliliter champagne bottle of beer, like. Yeah, $50 is still a lot, but like $50 for a bottle of champagne, that's, you know, like, okay, you expect it to taste good, but this is not going to rock your world. This $50 bottle of beer, she tries it and she's like, I've had $300 bottles of champagne. This blows every champagne I have ever had out of the water. Like all of these $300 bottles that I've poured for VIPs, this is better. Yeah. And yet that is still a beer that I have brought to Thanksgiving dinner at Scott's house.
Absolutely.
Like we'll sit down for Thanksgiving. Like I will sit down for Thanksgiving dinner with a 2-year-old 6 feet away from me and drink this beer.
Yeah,
and that is a beer
that Thanksgiving.
This brings up a really. I'd like
Lincoln
to.
and Fitz can just entertain you.
Yeah,
they'll be great, and
that'll
pretty
be
soon
great.
Row too. We're gonna do that. Friendsgiving soon. After COVID.
I'll cook.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I have a good beer brine.
So.
Is it saga based?
It should be. There you go.
It is now.
I bet the code switch would be fantastic for that as well. With the time.
Last year we did Shaka.
Oh,
ooh,
yeah.
Nice.
This year, Saga. Okay, so hearing you talk about all this stuff, it especially glassware and notes and expectations, and one thing I wanted to kind of present an opinion that I've had for a while, and then get your guys' reaction to it. And I think I know how you're going to react to it.
I love
but it's funny when we start thinking about, if you start about big categories of alcohol, right? You've got beer, you've got wine, and then you've got booze, right?
Yeah.
And then within booze, like my favorite is whiskey, for example. But what I think is really funny is that in the United States, and this is very different in other parts of the world. So I've lived in the UK. I've traveled extensively in a lot of places. I've lived in Chile and South America and traveled around. These things are not the same everywhere you go. But here in the United States specifically, wine is very much an elitist drink. And the average person, so for example,
but at the same time, it's elitist, or it is the lowest
the box
denominator.
of wine frowns you, the kind of thing. But at the same time, here's the thing:
like
like
a lot of Carlo Rossi in college.
Yeah,
you could get it for like $5.49 at
what
Walmart.
I'm saying though is, if anyone were to pour wine into a solo cup, they're almost either apologetic for it or making fun of how high class they are. You see what I'm saying? And that wine is expected to be served with food and paired. Wine is expected to be put in a nice glass that has a shape to it, right? If you had a nice Thanksgiving dinner and you poured a red wine into a straight-sided tumbler, like a rocks glass or a highball, almost everyone would look at you funny. Am I right? They don't expect that. Like down in Chile, where they make wine, some of the best wine in the world, they do that shit all the time. They'll pour it into whatever glass they have, a coffee mug or a straight-sided water glass. Doesn't matter. It's this is a $5 bottle of wine. We don't need to be fancy with this, right?
Yeah.
Here, we have that expectation. But beer, people like, why are you being so snobby about your glasses and all this stuff? Just put it in whatever. Same thing with whiskeys. That like whiskeys, like it needs to be that classic rocks glass, which is the worst shape for most good whiskeys. A bad whiskey on ice, sure, all day. But a nice scotch, a really nice bourbon, you want some shape to it also, right? Anything that's flavor positive and nuanced, you want a glass that's appropriate to that. And for beer and whiskey, our typical American glass choices, the worst possible choices, because we are used to crappy quality bourbons and crappy quality beers.
Yeah.
Whereas our wine, for whatever reason, we've embraced good glasses. So I don't know. What are you guys' instant reactions to that?
Well, my first thought is that Carrie and I are totally looking at each other like, oh yeah, I've totally drunk wine from a coffee cup.
Well, when you made coffee cup, I was like, what do you mean?
Wait, like, as it's like, wait, have you not done that?
You're
like,
not supposed to do that? We both looked at I think I still put it in like my Christmas mug that I haven't packed away yet. It's less likely to fall down. So I think I see where like at first when you were presenting your new opinion, which I love that sentence. I love it. I'm about to present a new opinion. I didn't know where you were circling around, but I get I think for me it kind of depends on your surroundings and the people too, because I've never been to Napa. You know, prior to moving to Columbus, I was 10 years in Ann Arbor. I lived out in Washington. So like we drank everything out of yellow plastic Tios cups because it was a taco place that delivered until 4 a.m. And if you got the large soda, it was a really nice cup. So everybody's cabinets were just filled with free Tios cups. So
kind of like the Comfest cups in Columbus.
Yeah. But I see what you're saying. I think that it's hard to overcome some people, you know, regarding beer and saying, come on, it's a beer. Yeah. And I think that kind of circles back in the beginning with the IPA or the hazy IPAs that hopefully people who enjoy learning ask questions and want to know those things. And I think for me, if somebody wants it in a rocks glass, have it in a rocks glass. But can I show you something?
Yeah.
Let's do a side-by-side. I've had people say that about heads on beers, you know, so...
what do you mean by like heads on beers?
Like, after like 2 decades of being in this industry, like how many men, I'm sorry, are like,
that guy.
Fill it all the way up to the top. What are you doing?
God.
You know?
Yeah.
So no problem, because my job is to respect the fact that you're spending money in our establishment. I'm going to respect that first. You came in here. My job is not to shame you or make you look, you know, I just don't think it ever benefits anybody to like look down on somebody for whatever they want.
Okay.
But can I show you something?
Yeah.
Here is your beer as you requested. Here's another beer side by side on me. Take your Miller Lite with this, take this with this, and just try it. See if you can notice a difference. Every single time. Whoa. I never knew that. And so now they want to have their beers poured like that.
Yep.
They didn't have to feel ashamed. Yep. They got an extra beer as a result.
Yep. And they learned something new.
Yeah. And they can enjoy their beer better too. So I hope that like whiskeys and wines, it's all the same. Like if this is how you want it, my job isn't to force my
slightly more
education down your throat.
I have a funny story about that.
I do too. So you go first,
okay.
And then we're almost at the end of our time.
Or a funny factoid.
We're wrapping up pretty soon.
There was a lawsuit in England over that. A guy once sued his local pub for not filling his beers all the way to the brim, saying that they were shorting him.
Did he win?
No, he lost. Like in England, it is now like there is now a legal precedent that
amazing.
There is now legal precedent that it is entirely reasonable for a pub to pour a beer with an appropriate amount of head on top.
That's amazing.
Yeah. That's
love
fantastic. So
From the country that decided that the greatest invention of the year was the Guinness widget.
yeah, well, that was an international engineering award, by the way. So, and that's Republic of Ireland, I believe, not UK. So, anyway.
What's your story?
Nerd alert. Okay, so my story is I once did kind of what you're describing, potentially more assholic, but not necessarily. It was amongst a group of friends. We were having a whiskey club, right? And so this was years and years ago, and what I did was I had several different whiskeys, and it was a small group of friends. We're all comfortable, just, drink out of the same glass, no problem. So I had, half a dozen whiskeys in a row, like labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and everyone grab a note card and take your tasting notes on each of these whiskeys. And then we're going to have a conversation about which ones we like better, what kind of things we got, blah, 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 right? And so we did. So 1 through 6, and it was a conversation. And some
Were they
people
all in
like
the same glass?
No, they were all different glasses.
All different glasses. I know exactly where this is going.
So we had the conversation, and if you've been listening, you probably understand where this is going. And people had strong opinions about which number was the best whiskey and what kind of notes they got. And it turns out it was all the same exact whiskey in different glasses. But because the extreme shape differences of the glasses made them present as different whiskeys. Granted, they were all supposed to be, I told them it was like, these are all space-side Scotch whiskeys. So they were all single malts from the same region. So they were expecting a similar whiskeys, right? But it was the exact same whiskey in 6 different glasses. Blew people's minds, right? Because that glass shape determines so much in what you taste, what you smell, how you perceive all of those flavors.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Kind of an asshole, but proved my
kind
point.
of not. And one of the things circling back to your point about different beer cultures and, in the United States, people often not thinking of beer as being like the high-end thing that needs a good glass. These two things aren't mutually exclusive. Like, where was I trying to say that? Like, I think about the beer drinking culture in Germany and Belgium and having the right glass for that beer, like, makes a big deal. But beer is not treated as this beer is not a snobby, pretentious thing in Germany. Yeah. Not at all. But they're still like, oh, this is not just this is a Hefeweizen glass, but this is the glass for this Hefeweizen. This is the glass. Belgium's the same way. Like, they put the care into, it can still be the thing that you just enjoy while you're having lunch. But they're still going to take the time to pour it out just right for you in the right glassware, because that's how you're going to enjoy it best. And that's what it comes down to. It's not about being snobby. It's not about being pretentious. It's not about being better than. It's about...
I love that too. And it's like, you don't need to be that guy who brings his own tasting glass everywhere he goes. You know what I'm saying? It's like, It's fine. You're at a tailgate, drink it out of the can. I don't care. Put it in a solo cup when it's appropriate. Like, drink it how you want to, first and foremost. Be open to trying different ways of drinking it to know what you want. Don't have preconceived notions about that.
I think that's the difference.
But whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't always have to be the same experience. But if you're going to make a fire and sit in your leather chair and read an ancient text and chew on a scotch, put it in the right glass. You know what I mean? Like, do that sort of thing. Like, if you're going to really dig in and pay attention, you've got to do it the right way.
Right.
You can have that exact same beer or scotch or wine wherever else and just consider the context.
Yeah.
And go
I think a cultural thing, there are people out there, unfortunately, that look at knowledge as pretentious. I don't
Problems
know
with
any other
experts,
way to
yeah.
say that.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like knowing something that somebody else makes you like, it's almost for some people, not all people, it is this creation of I don't know how to phrase this without coming
Offending
across
too many people.
yeah, like it's so, like basically like
If you know more than
you're an asshole if you try to.
If you actually know what you're talking about.
Yeah, like I didn't know how to say it without
that if you know more about something than somebody else does, they're going to think that you think that you're better than them because of that.
Well, I think
or
that
above
it's
them or
almost
anything like
like
that.
the opposite. It's almost like this stance of like, screw you, like fight against the system of like knowledge.
You
Like,
think you know the
Yeah.
whatever happened
Well,
to, hey, Cam, I never knew that. That's awesome. And now I'm better because I know more. It's,
Well, I failed.
screw you, you're pretentious.
I
you're a
failed
jerk.
high school biology class, therefore I know everything there is about medicine
Yeah.
and what you should take because I
'Cause you
did
read
10
an
minutes
article
of Google
on
research
Google.
on the
Yeah,
line.
of course.
Clearly.
Fine.
It's that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
that-
Yeah. So I think like people like to answer your original question, like people that have issues with beer being put in a certain glass,
Yeah.
you know, enjoy your Budweiser. I don't know what to tell
Right.
you.
You know what? The Budweiser drink, I don't usually, the Budweiser
No.
people
They're
aren't
pretty
what's
cool.
on-
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
pretty
they're
cool.
pretty cool.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. So
It's-
are the Modelo.
I mean,
Yeah, Modelo.
I
Yeah,
can drink
It's-
a good
right,
Modelo.
sure.
Yeah, it's the Stella people.
Yeah.
Like, actually, I'm kind of not joking.
It's almost those middle row IPA people.
I mean,
I don't know.
for the most part, I think that is something that is cool about beer and craft brewing. And occasionally you get that one person.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like, I mean, it could also be different that, like, my stance as a brewer, it's pretty rare that I have somebody who tries to be a know-it-all and tries to one-up me. Like,
Yeah,
I could
Cameron
count on
is
one t-
legitimately an expert in this field.
like, and I think I've had, like, when we, back before the dark ages, back before the dark times of COVID, back when we were doing, like, brewery tours, when a dozen strangers would climb into a van together and go from one brewery to a next.
Oh, the old
Oh,
days.
the old days.
Marketing.
Back in the years of me giving brewery tours, I could count on one time, on one hand, the number of times, like, somebody's tried to catch me out or trip me up or
Gotcha.
or like
To your face.
that's true. Well, during one of those things, and only one that really sticks out. So, like, that's.
I think it's also like in people's approaches too. Like your approach was like, I don't think it was. I think it was funny and it was interesting and it was thought provoking and So I think if beer is meant to be enjoyed and shared and have a good time and
Well, guys, we're pretty much out of time now. It's actually a little bit over, so we're gonna sign off this week. Like us, follow us, subscribe to our channel, add the little bell at the top. Join us next week. We have a special Mother's Day edition next week, which will be a lot of fun. And Carrie, next time we're on together, remind me to tell the story of multiple times doing domestic lager tastings.
Okay.
Oh God.
And the assholery will get
Okay.
even larger. I can almost guarantee you
That's
that.
awesome.
So thanks again, everyone, for joining us here on Endeavor BS. And again, the BS means brewing and spirits. No other possible interpretation. Have a great Friday, great weekend, and we will see you again next week.